My name is Brandon Thomas Sparks, BrandonThomas Sparks.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You're right.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Sparks.
Afternoon, Mr. Biles.
How are you employed, sir?
I am an active duty U.S. Coast Guard.
And how long have you been in the U.S. Coast Guard?
I've been in the Coast Guard for 5 years now, sir.
And what do you do for the Coast Guard?
I do drug interdiction, migrant interdiction, as well as search and rescue.
And does that duty often require you to go out to sea?
Yes, sir, for 3 to 4 months at a time.
Okay. And do you know a gentleman by the name of Roy Kronk?
Yes, Roy Kronk is my biological father.
How long have you been estranged from your biological father?
Yes, sir, since I was 8 years old.
And around the summer or the year of 2008, did you get reacquainted with your biological father?
Yes, sir, I believe it was sometime in June that I had reached out and made contact to Roy Kronk.
Okay. And why did you reach out to your father?
Through his parents, Bud and Lois Kronk, they expressed an interest in he and I getting to know each other again. Stated that he was rehabilitated from the person he used to be.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. It's not relevant.
Sustained.
Don't tell us what other people said, okay? And you then began to speak with him?
Yes, sir.
And how did you begin to speak with him?
We made contact with each other almost on a nightly basis from June to February 2009.
Where do you live?
I reside in Seattle, Washington. My family resides in Maryland. I'm currently attached to my unit, which is the Coast Guard Cutter Midget.
And that's based out of Seattle, Washington?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in 2008, were you based out of Seattle, Washington?
No, sir. In 2008, my current residence was in Virginia Beach, where I was stationed to Station Little Creek.
Okay. And this contact that you were having with your father, was it how?
It was mainly cellular phone.
Okay.
Cellular phone, ma'am?
Cellular phone?
Yes.
Now, during the months of July through December of 2008, did you ever have any conversations with your father about this case?
No, sir. He would mention it before. He would talk about the search that was going on, but at the time,
Object to hearsay, Your Honor.
Sustained.
This is direct impeachment evidence, Your Honor.
Not conversations.
Well, you have to ask specific questions about specific
Yes, sir.
conversation.
Yes, sir. Did your father state to you that he knew something about this case?
yes, sir, it did. At the time, though, I was not aware that it was about the case.
That was a yes or no.
Sustained. The question calls for yes.
Yes,
or
sir.
no.
What did he tell you he knew?
He told me that he knew where the remains were.
And when did he tell you this?
This was in November 2008.
How do you know it was in November 2008?
It was the time before December 11th when the epiphany that he mentioned the remains, but he never named the name to go with it. At the time, I thought it was far-fetched. So December 11th, when he called and told me that what they were mentioning on the news was him, that's when I had an inkling. And I immediately asked him, why didn't he go get it before? Why did he wait this long?
And what did he say?
He didn't have an answer.
Object to the hearsay, Your Honor.
Hold on, let's do that question.
Go ahead.
He would avoid the topic, and then he would try to go on about.
Object, Your Honor. This is supposed to be impeachment
Correct.
hearsay.
Specific question, specific
Yes, sir.
answer.
Yes, sir. Did he have make any other statements about this case?
No, sir.
Now, what was your telephone number at the time, sir?
It was 609-972-5483.
defense, I'm sorry, state's exhibit. RQ. State's RQ into evidence, and there's the stipulation that we would ask. Get ready.
What says the state?
No objection.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is stipulation between the state of Florida and the defendant. Stipulation. The attached cellular telephone records are true and correct copies of the business records of Sprint and Nextel regarding phone number 609-927-5483, subscriber Brandon Sparks, from July 1st, 2008 through December 30th, 2008. The parties have agreed to this fact, and it should be considered as true in your deliberations, bearing the signature of Linda Drain Burdick, Jose Baez, and Caylee Marie Anthony. Be received in evidence as defense exhibit.
Number 71.
Mr. Sparks, those are your phone records, are they not?
Yes, sir. Just a correction. It's 609-972, sir.
Okay, and you voluntarily provided them?
Yes, sir.
Now, did your father ever mention that he had found Caylee's skull?
Yes, sir, he did.
Okay. And was this prior to December 11th?
Yes, sir.
And how are you so sure that it happened in November?
Well, again, sir, the only significant event I would have to say that was in November was Thanksgiving. Prior to that, I had told my wife and I told my mother as well, which my mother had stated that.
Don't tell us what your mother stated.
Of course.
Okay. And this was around Thanksgiving time when you went to visit your family?
Actually, sir, I had to reside in my unit, unfortunately,
Okay.
for Thanksgiving.
Okay. And do you hold any ill will against your father?
No, sir.
Did you at that time?
No, sir.
I have no further questions.
Cross-examination. You may.
Good afternoon,
Good
Mr.
afternoon.
Sparks. Looks like you have followed in the footsteps of both your mother and father in the Coast Guard, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
In 2008, you said you were living in Virginia Beach.
Yes, ma'am.
However, it wasn't until October 5th of 2009 that you signed a statement that was prepared for you regarding whatever knowledge you might have in this case. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
In that statement, you refer to this telephone call that you've testified to here today, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
May I have the defense exhibit?
You may.
Let me show you what's been marked as. Get back to my. Defense 71 in evidence, and why don't you take a look at those and tell me if you can identify the phone calls that were made between you and your father, Roy Kronk, during the period of time between July and December of 2008. Can you identify them?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Okay, they're highlighted, aren't they?
Yes, ma'am.
The phone number for your father, Mr. Kronk, starts with 321, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Is that how you're identifying it? Because you had it programmed into your phone, correct?
No, ma'am. I believe I had the 757 number programmed on my phone.
Now, when you instigated contact with your father in 2008, you didn't tell your mother, correct?
No, ma'am, I did not.
In fact, you kept that from your mother for a substantial period of time after you initiated contact with Mr. Kronk, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell me which phone call on there is the one that you're referring to in your direct testimony as having received in November of 2008.
I'm afraid I can't, ma'am.
You don't know which of the many phone calls that you had with your father in 2008 this particular one you're discussing was.
No, ma'am, I did not.
In fact, you didn't remember that it was in November of 2008 until you were reminded of that fact by your mother and your wife, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's not something that you yourself have an independent recollection of.
Until December 11th.
Until December 11th,
Yes, ma'am.
that's when you realized you had a conversation with your father in November?
I had knowledge of it, but I disacknowledged the fact that he ever said it. I thought it was far-fetched.
All right. So in October of 2009, when you signed a statement that was typed for you by somebody else, right?
What statement would that be, ma'am?
May I approach the witness?
Make,
Yes, ma'am.
You didn't prepare this statement, you just signed it, right?
Yes, ma'am.
In October of 2009.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's when you recalled that this conversation, one of many, occurred prior to Thanksgiving of 2008, correct?
Already testified, it was December 11th.
overruled.
Your question again, ma'am?
When you had this statement prepared for you that you signed, that's when you realized or remembered or had help remembering that the conversation was prior to Thanksgiving of 2008, correct?
No, ma'am, it was December 11th that I recalled.
Oh, the conversation about the skull was December 11th?
Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. The conversation about the skull was in November. It wasn't until December 11th that it became relevant. At the time, he told me that he urinated in the ditch, went out and found the remains of this little girl. And when I had said the little girl, I said the little girl everyone's been looking for. Yes, ma'am.
All right. So Roy Kronk informed you of that on December 11th,
No, ma'am. He informed me that in November.
okay? But you can't tell us where on your records that occurred.
No, ma'am, I
Phone
cannot.
records. You don't remember at all,
No, ma'am.
okay? And after December 11th is when you realized, when you were talking with your mother and your wife, that any other conversation occurred in November, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
The conversation that you're speaking of, Mr. Kronk also told you that he was going to be on television the next day, correct?
No, ma'am. He told me the day of that he was going to be on television.
And did you see him on television shortly after the conversation?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
You realized that your father did not appear on television until December 19th of 2008.
Yes, ma'am.
And this conversation that you had with him was perhaps not the day before, but shortly before that, correct?
It was that day, ma'am. Before that, he wanted to keep a certain amount of anonymity. Anonymity? He was going to keep his identity a secret.
Mr. Sparks, when you made the statement in 2009, that was when a defense investigator found you.
Objection leading.
Sustained, rephrase the question.
Were you questioned by law enforcement in October 2009, or were you questioned by someone else?
To my knowledge, it was questioned by a detective, Mr. Mortimer Smith.
Okay. And he worked for the defense, correct?
Yes.
After making this statement, has law enforcement ever called you up and wanted to speak with you?
No,
Object
sir.
to the relevance.
Overruled.
No, sir.
So you've never even spoken to a gentleman by the name of Detective Melich?
No, sir.
You even know who he is?
No, sir, I did not.
Now, did you know anything about this case before, during 2008?
No, sir.
And why not?
Object to the relevance.
Relevance is to
Goes to
why
his
not.
lack of bias, Judge.
Part.
It goes to his lack of bias.
He can answer the question.
No, sir, I knew nothing of the case until December 11th.
And how many calls have you had with your father over, or did you have with your father in 2008?
From June to February 2009, it was almost 3 to 4 calls a week.
And is that, well, what's the reason why you can't remember exactly which call it was?
Well, as I said before, at the time, I didn't pay any mind. He's always had, imagination and saying far-fetched things.
Objection, Your Honor.
Basis of objection.
Irrelevant.
Sustained.
On December 11th, when your father called you, is that when you first realized the significance of what he had told you 1 month before?
Yes, sir, it was.
I have no further questions.
Any additional questions?
Just very briefly. Mr. Sparks, did your father tell you that he had taken this skull and had it at his home or in his car, or had done anything else to it in November of 2008, as you claim?
No, ma'am, the only thing he had said is
Okay.
that, Roger,
He didn't tell you that he had taken this skull from some sort of scene,
no,
correct?
ma'am.
Right. He told you that he located the skull, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
That he contacted law enforcement, correct?
ma'am.
That there was a media blitz attendant or associated with this case, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
That he was going to be on TV,
Yes, ma'am.
that you hadn't seen him since you were 8 years old, and that you should look for him, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Your Honor.
May the witness be excused.
Your father told you he was going to be rich and famous, didn't he?
Objection, Your Honor. It's not impeachment of the witness.
It was asked by,
It's also outside the scope.
it's not outside the scope. She was,
I will permit the question to be asked.
Yes, sir, he did.
no further questions.
May the witness be excused. Thank you, sir. You may be excused.
Roy Kronk, R-O-Y, K-R-O-N-K.
You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Kronk.
Good afternoon, sir.
I want to talk to you about something that was not covered with you yesterday, and that was a second statement that you made on December 11th, 2008.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, for a little background, if I may. After you made your discovery, you were put aside somewhere by law enforcement, correct?
Not really. I just sat in my truck.
and you were asked to wait there.
Yes, sir.
And then shortly after that, that's when a deputy asked you to write out your statement.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And this is the statement where you state the skull dropped out of the bag.
Yes, sir.
Then you waited around for a while before the detectives can get there.
A lot was happening at that time, helicopters, a lot of other things. So I was just kind of just watching it all go by. So I really can't tell you.
Eventually, detectives got there and spoke with you.
Yes, sir.
They asked you to go down the block and so you could speak privately.
Objection to leading.
Sustained, rephrase the question.
Did they ask you to go somewhere so they could speak with you somewhat privately?
I just went to their car as far as I know. So
And it is at that time that you gave a actual official recorded statement, did you not?
I believe so. If you say so, I really don't remember.
They advised you were being recorded?
I really don't remember, sir.
Okay. If I show you that statement, would that refresh your recollection?
Yes, sir.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
Look at lines 21 through 24.
Okay. Okay.
Did they advise you they were going to be recording the statement?
Yes, sir.
And you understood it and acknowledged it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And at that time, you told them what you saw and what you did?
Yes, sir.
And you obviously wanted to be truthful?
Oh, yes, of course, sir.
And you obviously wanted to give them as much information as possible?
Well, I just wanted to tell them what happened. Yes, sir.
And do you recall telling them on 2 occasions that you did not touch anything?
Yes, sir.
And this was after being asked if you had any physical contact with the skull?
I told them that I manipulated the skull with my meter stick, but is that physical contact?
So that's all you told them that you did, that you touched the skull with your meter stick?
Yes, sir.
You did not tell them that you put your meter stick in the eye socket and lifted up the skull?
Yes, sir. I explained that yesterday. Yes, sir.
Would you like to review your statement to see if you said that?
No, sir. I know that I said that.
Okay. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Where are we at? Okay. Yes, sir.
There is no statement in here about sticking your meter reader stick in the eye socket, is there, sir?
No, sir.
Okay. And in fact, you reiterated what you said in your first statement, which was the skull dropped out of the bag.
Yes, sir.
Towards the end of the statement, you were asked if there was anything else that you wanted to tell them that you thought was important. Do you recall that?
No, sir. That was 3 years ago.
No problem. May I refresh, can I show it to you to refresh your recollection?
You may.
There to the end of the statement, if you can.
Okay. Okay.
And when you were asked that question, sir, you never stated, I called you 4 times back in August.
I mentioned calling Crime Line.
In this statement, there is no statement about crime line, is there, sir?
This was asked and answered yesterday.
No, Judge, not, this statement was never gone into yesterday.
Just a second, one at a time. I can't hear when both of you are talking. Ms. Burdick, your objection?
These questions were asked and answered. This is territory that was covered by Mr. Mason yesterday for several hours.
That was another statement, Your Honor. This statement was never spoken to or covered by Mr. Mason.
Objection sustained.
Who did you tell, sir, that you had called Crime Line back in August?
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered yesterday.
I don't believe you gave a name, Judge. Or-
I'll give you some additional leeway, but let's get in and get out. Continue.
Yes, sir.
The officer that appeared on the scene.
Was that the first male officer?
I believe so, sir, yes.
Okay. Did he tell you to keep your mouth shut?
He asked me not to mention it, but he never told me to keep my mouth shut.
Do you recall giving a statement on January 6, 2009, during an investigation where your lawyer was present?
Yes, sir.
A couple of other police officers, Sergeant Rob Hardiman and Mike Ruggiero from Internal Affairs?
I believe it was just one other officer in the room with us that I remember, sir.
Okay. And this was at 3:56 p.m.?
If that's what the record states, I have no objection to that.
Do you recall being asked, you did, what did you say? And then answering, I told them I called Crime Line on it, and I said, I reported this back in August. And then the question was, you told them that? And your answer was, yeah. And then you were asked, okay, so how did they respond? And your answer was,
Objection.
they told me to.
Your Honor, objection to eliciting any hearsay as to what other individuals said
I'm impeaching, Judge.
Impeaching who?
with his.
Mr. Kronk.
It's not his statement if you're reading what somebody else says.
I'm giving the answers to the questions. I'm reading the
Let me
questions.
see the statements. Approach the bench. Objection sustained.
Mr. Kronk, after you had made your statement on December 11th, your two statements, that the skull had dropped out of the bag, law enforcement came and spoke to you again on December 17th, did they not?
Yes, sir, they did.
They came to your home,
Yes, sir.
and the purpose of that was to clarify your statements, was it not?
Objection calls for an opinion.
Sustained.
It was then when you changed your story, is that correct?
No, sir.
Did you testify yesterday that your first story was changed?
Yes, sir, I did.
And the time that you changed the story was on December 17th when the police came to your house.
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This was asked and answered yesterday.
Overruled.
That was when it was actually done, right?
That is when I first publicly did it, but I had changed my mind long before that.
Okay. But this is the first time that it was actually given to law enforcement, the change of the story.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the reason for that is because you couldn't have spotted a skull in August, and the skull couldn't have made its way into the bag in December, correct?
Objection calls for speculation, argumentative.
Sustained.
Your second statement, sir, now the skull is out of the bag as opposed to it dropping out of the bag on December 11th, correct?
Yes, sir.
And the reason you changed your story, sir, is because law enforcement had then found out about your calls in August and realized that you had made a statement that the skull was out of the bag as opposed to in the bag.
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Why did you change your story, sir?
After I had a chance to calm down and get everything past what I had been through that day, I reran the events in my mind and I realized I had made a mistake.
Okay. On this audio, were you saying that when you made this statement, or would you characterize your demeanor as calm?
I would characterize my demeanor as overwhelmed.
And my question to you is, would you say you came across calm or excited?
Sustain.
Now, on both of the statements on the December 11th, we've agreed that you never made a statement about sticking the meter reader into the eye socket, correct?
If I omitted that statement, it wasn't done intentionally. It was just, once again, helicopters flying around me and just really in a very overwhelmed type of a state at that time, sir.
On December 17th, when you're at home with the police, you don't mention it then either, do you, sir?
Your Honor, I object. This was all asked and answered yesterday.
No.
Sustain.
How many statements did you give, sir, before you had mentioned that you stuck the meter reader stick in the eye socket?
Objection asked and answered yesterday.
This is not asked and answered.
Sustain.
Sir, did you make 7 sworn statements before ever mentioning that you put the meter reader stick in the eye socket?
I have no idea. I have no idea how many statements I gave.
Was the first time you mentioned anything about sticking the meter reader in the eye socket July 30th of 2010?
Objection asked and answered yesterday.
Sustain.
If I can have one moment, Judge.
You may. May Mr. Kronk be excused.
Subject to recall, yes.
Sir, you may be excused, subject to recall. You're up, sir.
Edward Turso, EDU, ARD, TURSO.
You may proceed.
Good afternoon, Deputy Terso.
Good afternoon, sir.
Were you the first responding male officer to the scene off Suburban Drive on December 11th, 2008?
I was.
Did you have the first interaction with Mr. Kronk?
I did.
And at any time that afternoon, did Mr. Kronk tell you that he had called Crime Line back in August of 2008?
He did not.
And which stands to reason, did you ever tell him not to say anything about calling law enforcement back in August of 2008?
Not at all.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
None, thank you.
May the deputy be excused. Yes, sir. Thank you, deputy. You may be excused, sir.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Yuri Melich, Yuri-Melich.
Good afternoon, Detective Melich.
Good afternoon.
Sir, as the lead investigator of this case, did you respond to Suburban Drive on December 11, 2008?
Yes,
And as part of your duties, did you make contact with any witnesses there?
yes,
Would that witness be Mr. Roy Kronk?
yes.
And how long did you speak to Mr. Kronk for?
Maybe 10 or 15 minutes total.
Okay. And were you aware of the statement that he made there prior to you arriving?
Yes, he had a written statement already completed.
Okay. And you reviewed this statement with him?
I reviewed the statement. I don't recall if I reviewed it with him. I believe I did.
Okay. And at this point, as the lead investigator, it was your job to then conduct an interview of Mr. Kronk to find out what he knew and what happened.
The statement was very brief, and as a norm, I conduct a recorded interview so we can get more on tape. Some people just don't like to write that much, so we record it for that.
Okay. And throughout the entire time that you spoke to Mr. Kronk on December 11th, 2008, did he advise you that he had called 4 times prior in August?
No, he did not.
Did he tell you he called any time in August?
No.
Was it on December 17th, 2008, when you first found out that he had called back in August?
Yes.
And did you immediately get those crime line tips and those calls that he had made back in August?
Within a short period of time, we did, yes.
And did you then have to go and clarify with him about a story of the skull rolling out of a bag?
Your Honor, I object. It's improper impeachment under 9614 and hearsay.
Overrule at this point.
I obtained another statement from him the evening of December 17th.
And was the reason for that because you wanted to clarify if the skull actually did roll out of the bag?
Rolled out or dropped out, yes.
And was it at that time that Mr. Kronk changed his story?
When you say change, we went there for clarification on what had occurred. So he added information that wasn't, I guess, previously on a written statement or recorded statement.
In the statement on August 11th, he stated the skull dropped out of the bag.
I'd have to refer to the transcript to see the exact verbatim.
I can show it to the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
Yes, it's the statement we took on December 11th with Mr. Kronk.
Does he state that the skull dropped out of the bag?
Your Honor, again, I'm going to object under 9614, parens 2, regarding this extrinsic evidence of this statement. If we can approach, I can explain
You
further.
may. Objection sustained. Next question.
Detective Melich, after speaking with Mr. Kronk on the 17th, well, let me rephrase that, withdraw that. Detective Melich, on December 17th is the very first time you, as the lead investigator in this case, found out that Roy Kronk had called law enforcement 4 times in August of 2008.
Not entirely correct. It was the first time I realized he had called previously, but it was still a few days until I determined it was actually 4 times.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Nothing in the statement.
May the detective be excused, or is he subject to recall?
Always subject to recall.
Detective, you excused, subject to recall. You want him to hang around for the balance of the day, or is he free to go about his business? Yes, sir. Which way? You're free for the day, sir.
Outstanding. Thank you.